Imagine walking into a store dedicated to the past and demanding to speak to a manager because the merchandise is old. It sounds like a joke, but these people are dead serious. We are counting down 55 of the most brain-numbing, hilarious, and completely absurd complaints from customers who fundamentally do not understand how time works. From people trying to Bluetooth ancient phones to demanding warranties on Civil War gear, these stories are absolute gold. Let the madness begin. 1. Have you ever felt totally judged by a painting? One highly paranoid shopper bought a set of creepy Victorian family portraits to decorate his gothic living room. 2 days later, he rushed back into the store practically in tears. He aggressively demanded the shop owner personally paint over all the subject's eyes because they were staring at him while he ate cereal in his underwear. He seriously wanted a refund for emotional distress caused by centuries-old oil paint. 2. One incredibly paranoid shopper completely misunderstood the concept of vintage medical equipment. They purchased a creepy, leather-bound doctor's bag from the Civil War era just to use as a unique briefcase. They rushed back to the store wearing thick rubber gloves, aggressively demanding the owner completely sterilize the entire shop. They had found a tiny speck of dried brown liquid on the bottom and convinced themselves it was a highly contagious 19th century plague. It was literally just a spilled bottle of old ink. 3. Getting mad about false advertising takes a wild turn when the paranormal is involved. A self-proclaimed ghost hunter spent $200 on a creepy porcelain doll because the tag jokingly warned it might be cursed. A week later, she aggressively demanded a full refund. She was absolutely furious that her security cameras captured zero demonic activity and accused the store of selling counterfeit haunted artifacts. The manager had to politely explain that spirits do not work on a schedule. 4. A very confused shopper bought a beautiful hand-painted globe from the 1920s as a gift for a geography teacher. Less than 48 hours later, they stormed back in and slammed it onto the front counter. They were absolutely livid, complaining that the item was completely defective because it still showed the Soviet Union and was missing several modern countries. They aggressively demanded that the shop owner somehow provide a software update or manually repaint the borders to accurately reflect current geopolitics. 5. Finding hidden treasures inside old furniture is half the fun of antiquing, but one guy took it way too far. He purchased a mid-century desk and discovered a faded grocery store coupon from 1952 tucked inside a drawer. Instead of keeping it as a cool piece of history, he brought it back to the antique shop and demanded a 20-cent discount on a separate purchase. He firmly argued that the store was legally obligated to honor all vintage promotions found on their premises. 6. A culinary enthusiast bought a gorgeous heavy-duty cast iron skillet that had survived 2 world wars, only to return it completely ruined. The customer had scrubbed off decades of perfect seasoning with steel wool and harsh chemicals, then complained loudly to everyone in the store that the pan was completely useless because their morning eggs stuck to the bottom. They literally wanted a refund because a pioneer-era cooking tool did not perform exactly like modern chemical-coated, non-stick cookware. 7. Sometimes vanity and antique shopping just do not mix at all. A woman purchased a massive ornate silver mirror from the Roaring '20s. 2 days later, she called the police to report a fraudulent business. She claimed the mirror was definitely cursed or magically altered because it made her look 10 years older than the mirrors at her gym. The responding officer had to politely suggest that maybe the unforgiving antique glass was just a little more honest than modern vanity lighting. 8. Haggling is definitely a normal part of the antique buying experience, but one customer treated an upscale boutique like a weekend garage sale. They picked up a beautifully restored Tiffany lamp priced at $800 and confidently offered $3.50. When the owner laughed, assuming it was a joke, the buyer became highly offended and yelled that they could get the exact same thing at a thrift store. Are people just delusional or trying to be insulting on purpose? 9. A very distinguished-looking gentleman spent over an hour meticulously inspecting a set of velvet parlor chairs from the late 19th century. He was ready to hand over his cash until the owner casually mentioned the chairs originally belonged to a wealthy local family. The man immediately recoiled in total disgust, loudly protesting that he refused to pay full price for used furniture where strangers had previously sat. He somehow walked into a store selling century-old items and expected pristine inventory. 10. We have all gotten a little too used to modern conveniences, but this complaint is just legendary. A college student bought a beautiful, fully functional Underwood typewriter from the 1930s to work on their screenplay. They returned it exactly 1 week later, complaining that the backspace key was totally broken because it only moved the carriage back and did not actually erase the ink from the paper. They were genuinely furious that there was no autocorrect or quick delete function. 11. Imagine buying a sealed glass bottle of snake oil from 1910 and actually drinking it. One terrifyingly clueless guy did exactly that, downing century-old tonic meant to cure coughs. He rushed back to the shop the next day, screaming that his stomach felt like it was on fire and threatening a massive lawsuit for food poisoning. Who in their right mind chugs mysterious brown sludge they bought next to a rusted tractor seat? Have you ever seen anyone do something this dangerously stupid? 12. One incredibly vocal lady left a scathing 1-star review online because the entire store smelled like what she described as forgotten memories and expired grandmas. She demanded that the owner install heavy-duty air purifiers and spray everything with tropical scented room spray before she would ever consider stepping foot inside again. Apparently, the natural scent of polished mahogany and vintage books is deeply offensive if you are expecting the overwhelming aroma of a modern shopping mall. 13. Historical accuracy is completely lost on some people. An angry military collector purchased an authentic World War II helmet, only to return extremely agitated a few days later. He slammed the heavy steel onto the glass counter, complaining that the authentic combat dents and bullet grays ruined the smooth aesthetic of his gaming room. He genuinely demanded the shop owner use a hammer to pop the dents back out like it was a cheap auto body repair job. 14. Supernatural delusions take casual window shopping to a completely ridiculous and exhausting extreme. A frantic teenager sprinted into the antique shop carrying an ornate Gothic hand mirror she had bought the previous morning. She forcefully slammed the heavy silver frame onto the glass display case, crying that the dealer purposely sold her a cursed vampire relic. Her actual scientific proof was that she tried using the mirror inside a pitch-black room at midnight and saw absolutely nothing. 15. Mechanical engineering from the Victorian era apparently comes with major volume issues. A furious husband dragged a massive, incredibly expensive grandfather clock back into the showroom, demanding to speak to the person who designed it. He was losing his mind over the incredibly loud ticking noise keeping him awake all night. The absolute kicker? He aggressively demanded that the shop mechanic install a mute button or a volume control knob on a completely gear-driven piece of wooden machinery. 16. Buying a locked antique safe is the ultimate gamble, but one guy completely missed the concept. After purchasing a heavy iron safe from a bank demolished in 1920, he paid a professional locksmith a fortune to drill it open. Finding absolutely nothing but dust inside, he stormed right back to the antique dealer. He aggressively demanded financial compensation for the lost treasure he assumed was inside, claiming the store legally owed him a fortune in imaginary gold bars. 17. A deeply offended teenager threw a beautifully bound handwritten diary from a Civil War nurse directly at the checkout counter. She loudly complained that the dead author was completely boring, wrote entirely too much about the weather, and lacked any dramatic plot twists. She basically demanded a refund because history was not as entertaining as a modern television show. Would you seriously complain to a store manager that a woman from the 1860s lived an underwhelming lifestyle? 18. Storming through the front doors, a highly aggressive shopper waved an authentic Victorian corset around like a weapon. She screamed that the garment was designed for literal torture because it heavily bruised her ribs during a weekend costume party. She aggressively threatened to call the police on the shop owner for purposely selling dangerous medical hazards, completely ignoring the well-documented historical fact that 19th century high fashion was physically destructive by design. 19. Modern technology clashes with classic art in the most absurd ways possible. A tech bro bought a stunning, original oil painting from the 1940s and returned entirely enraged 3 days later. Why? Because an online platform rejected his attempt to turn the physical canvas into a digital crypto token. He viciously accused the antique store of selling pirated material and demanded his money back because he could not legally monetize the physical paint strokes on the internet. 20. Customer loyalty only goes so far when you completely lose your grip on reality. An elderly man walked in carrying a heavy brass telescope he had purchased from the exact same shop all the way back in 2004. He slammed the faded receipt on the counter, demanding a full refund adjusted for current inflation. When denied, he threw an epic temper tantrum, arguing that since antiques supposedly hold their value forever, the store was committing massive financial fraud. 21. A man bought a silver pocket watch from the late 1800s and stormed back into the shop 3 days later. He was absolutely furious that it stopped working after he dropped it on his kitchen floor. When the owner gently explained that a 150-year-old delicate timepiece does not come with a modern replacement guarantee, the guy threatened to report them for selling defective merchandise. Would you ever ask for a warranty on something from the Civil War era? Let me know in the comments. 22. Completely missing the point of acoustic sound, a furious teenager lugged a massive 1920s hand-cranked phonograph back through the front doors. She was loudly throwing a massive fit because she spent 3 hours trying to plug her smartphone into the brass horn. When she realized there was no hidden auxiliary port or Bluetooth, she accused the dealer of selling a useless wooden box. How does someone look at a century-old crank machine and expect it to stream modern pop music? 23. Ancient medicine is not meant to be practiced in a modern kitchen. A deeply unhinged woman purchased a dusty 1800s or herbal remedy book and tried brewing a historical love potion for her coworker. She barged into the antique shop waving a lawyer's business card, threatening a massive lawsuit because the vintage recipe just gave the poor guy explosive food poisoning instead of making him fall in love. She genuinely blamed the store for selling expired magical instructions. 24. Understanding basic economics is apparently optional for some folks. An extremely aggressive guy bought a pristine $50 Confederate bill from the Civil War era for a small collector's fee. He immediately marched over to a local gas station and tried to buy a carton of cigarettes with it. After the cashier laughed in his face, he came back to the antique shop screaming that they sold him counterfeit modern money. He literally demanded the owner cover his gas station tab as an apology. 25. Some levels of entitlement just leave you completely speechless. A woman paid top dollar for an exquisite silver-plated hairbrush from the Edwardian era, featuring real boar bristles. She returned it completely melted and destroyed after boiling it in a pot of bleach on her stove for 5 hours. She then had the absolute audacity to scream at the cashier, claiming the antique store purposely sold her unsanitary garbage that could not survive a simple modern deep cleaning process. 26. Sleeping on history sounds incredibly romantic until the sheer paranoia kicks in. A stressed-out couple purchased a gorgeous, hand-carved mahogany canopy bed from the 1850s. They demanded the shop send a delivery truck to take it back immediately, claiming the furniture was completely defective. Why? Because they kept having weird nightmares about churning butter and riding horses. They firmly insisted the wood was magically retaining the boring historical memories of previous owners. 27. You cannot expect real life to operate exactly like a fantasy movie. A hardcore gamer spent hundreds of dollars on an authentic 19th century cavalry sword. He brought it back completely covered in deep scratches, screaming that the blade was fake garbage. It turns out he went to the woods and repeatedly slammed it against a cinder block to test its durability against enemy armor. Would you ever take a priceless historical artifact and treat it like a cheap plastic toy weapon? 28. Photography used to require actual chemical science, But this angry shopper completely missed the memo. He bought a beautiful accordion-style Kodak camera from the 1930s and stormed back a week later. He aggressively slammed it on the counter, furious that there was no digital screen on the back to preview his selfies. He actually thought the ancient leather box possessed internal artificial intelligence that would magically print high-definition color photos from thin air. 29. The entitlement of some modern shoppers is truly a sight to behold. A woman bought a gorgeous, delicate porcelain tea set from 1910 that was clearly marked "hand wash only." She brought the shattered pieces back in a grocery bag, screaming at the owner. She had aggressively jammed the century-old gold-leafed cups into her modern high-heat dishwasher on the heavy-duty cycle. She actually demanded a full refund because the delicate antiques did not survive a modern chemical power wash. 30. Navigating the modern world with ancient tools requires at least a tiny bit of common sense. An incredibly loud tourist bought an authentic brass ship compass from the 1800s to use on a cross-country road trip. He called the antique shop from a random highway out in the desert, screaming into his phone that the device was completely broken. He was absolutely furious that it only pointed north and failed to warn him about an upcoming toll booth or traffic jam. 31. Geography classes absolutely failed this guy. A loud flat earth believer purchased a stunning classroom globe from the 1940s, only to bring it back the very next afternoon. He smashed the beautiful artifact onto the hardwood floor, yelling that the store sold spherical propaganda. He demanded the owner flatten the ruined cardboard pieces with a commercial steam press before accepting a replacement. Can you even imagine being this intensely unhinged over a piece of vintage decor? 32. Personal hygiene hits a hilarious new low when historical oddities are involved. A highly agitated woman dropped $200 on a set of genuine Victorian porcelain dentures meant strictly for a glass display case. She barged back into the shop the next day, absolutely furious that the unsterilized century-old fake teeth completely ruined her expensive dinner party. She actually tried to eat a tough steak with them and demanded a refund because they lacked the ergonomic fit of modern dentistry. 33. Missing basic common sense is a recurring theme with the general public. A frustrated college student bought a massive, solid iron clothing press from the 1890s to iron his formal wear. He stormed right up to the front counter 3 days later, throwing an absolute fit because he spent hours desperately searching for the hidden power cord. When the manager calmly explained the heavy metal block had to be heated over a literal open fire, the kid threatened to call consumer protection. 34. Historical body standards caused an absolute meltdown right in the middle of the vintage clothing section. A highly arrogant influencer tried squeezing into an authentic 1920s beaded silk flapper dress, only to completely rip the delicate century-old seams apart. Instead of apologizing for destroying the priceless garment, she violently threw the ruined fabric at the cash register. She screamed that the Roaring '20s were entirely too fat-phobic and lacked modern spandex technology. 35. Contacting the dead is apparently supposed to feel exactly like calling a modern technical support help desk. One highly impatient ghost enthusiast bought a wooden Ouija board from 1915 and demanded an immediate cash refund exactly 1 week later. They were aggressively complaining that the trapped spirits were entirely too slow at spelling out the answers to their questions. They basically treated the dark abyss of the afterlife like it desperately needed a fiber optic internet upgrade. 36. Sometimes the sheer absurdity of a retail complaint leaves you staring at the customer in absolute disbelief. A highly paranoid corporate lawyer bought a gorgeous 19th century landscape oil painting featuring a tiny anonymous family having a picnic. He quickly returned it, aggressively threatening legal action against the shop owner for clear privacy violations. He heavily argued that the store did not have signed consent forms from the random people painted onto the canvas back in the day. 37. Extreme stupidity nearly turned a backyard pool party into a fatal disaster. A guy bought an incredibly heavy brass deep-sea diving helmet from the early 1900s just to show off underwater. He rushed back soaking wet and absolutely enraged, claiming the vintage helmet was a scam because he nearly drowned in the deep end. He thought a hollow metal sphere magically produced oxygen without a surface air pump. Would you ever seriously trust your own life to an unattached metal bucket? 38. A younger customer purchased a bright yellow rotary phone from the 1970s, thinking it would be a quirky decor piece for their apartment. Less than 24 hours later, they were back at the register demanding a full refund. The reason? They could not figure out how to connect it to their home Wi-Fi network and were genuinely shocked it lacked Bluetooth capabilities. The shop owner had to physically demonstrate how landlines actually functioned before the angry buyer finally stomped out. 39. Understanding how basic locks function should probably be a mandatory life skill before leaving the house. An extremely angry gentleman bought a giant rusty iron skeleton key salvaged from a demolished 18th century church. He actually called the local police department on the antique dealer after aggressively trying to jam the massive artifact into his modern apartment door lock. He loudly accused the small business of selling defective security equipment that locked him out of his home. 40. Farm life aesthetics are incredibly trendy until actual grueling physical labor gets involved. A trendy interior designer bought a massive wooden butter churn from the pioneer days to make authentic organic butter for a weekend brunch. She dragged the heavy barrel back through the front doors, practically crying because her arms were tired. She furiously demanded to know where the hidden battery compartment was located, fully expecting the primitive wooden stick to have an automatic spin cycle. 41. A confused audiophile bought an incredibly rare 1900s wax cylinder recording of a classical orchestra. He returned the next day holding a totally melted blob of brown wax. He forcefully jammed the fragile historical artifact onto his modern heated turntable, cranking the needle down until it was destroyed. He furiously demanded the store reimburse him, screaming that their vintage vinyl was completely defective. Have you ever seen someone destroy history just to play a hipster record? 42. Vintage lawn games used to be incredibly dangerous, but one angry dad missed the memo entirely. He bought a pristine set of heavy metal lawn darts from the 1950s for a family barbecue. He stormed into the shop days later, aggressively demanding the owner pay a huge auto repair bill. Why? Because he blindly threw the heavy steel spikes straight up into the air and they pierced the roof of his brand new Tesla. He genuinely blamed the antique dealer for selling unguided missiles. 43. Grieving trends from the past deeply traumatized one highly sensitive shopper. She purchased a beautifully braided Victorian mourning brooch, totally ignoring the giant tag that explained it was woven from human hair. When a friend pointed out that she was wearing a dead stranger's actual locks, she sprinted back to the store in a panic. She aggressively demanded the shop owner pay a professional psychic $500 to spiritually cleanse her aura and rid her house of 19th century ghosts. 44. Modern smart homes and pioneer lighting are a hilariously terrible combination. A furious tech executive bought an authentic 1880s brass kerosene lamp to use as a rustic table centerpiece. He brought it back entirely covered in white chemical foam, yelling that the open flame immediately triggered his expensive smart house fire suppression system. He seriously demanded the shop mechanic rip out the cotton oil wick and somehow install a color-changing bulb that responds to voice commands. 45. Grooming standards have definitely changed, but this guy missed the memo entirely. A highly aggressive customer bought a pristine 1920s straight razor, thinking it would make his morning routine look incredibly cool. He returned the next day absolutely enraged, slamming the antique steel on the glass counter. He loudly threatened to sue the store because the century-old exposed blade did not feature a flexible pivoting head or a soothing aloe vera moisture strip like his cheap disposable plastic razors. 46. Macabre decor is not for everyone, especially when family comes to visit. An eccentric goth couple bought a genuine 1890s wooden burial coffin that had been repurposed into a coffee table. They came back demanding a full refund because it was entirely too uncomfortable. They actually tried to use the solid oak box as a guest bed for their visiting mother-in-law and were furious it lacked memory foam padding. Can you imagine forcing your own family to sleep inside a literal casket? 47. Prohibition. Era drinking accessories are incredibly popular, but they require actual maintenance. A loud college student spent a fortune on a real sterling silver hip flask from 1920. He barged into the store a month later, screaming that the metal was totally toxic. It turns out he left sugary energy drinks inside it for weeks, destroying the silver. He practically begged the owner to illegally coat the inside of the priceless artifact with cheap, modern plastic waterproofing. 48. Parenting advice from a century ago rarely works on modern teenagers. An exhausted mother bought a strict 1910s etiquette manual, hoping to teach her daughter some basic manners. She called the antique shop absolutely livid, demanding immediate financial compensation. When she tried reading the archaic rules out loud, her furious teenager grabbed the vintage book and threw it straight through their flat-screen television. Would you ever blame a bookstore for your kid's terrible behavior? 49. Winter sports history caused a huge headache for one unlucky dealer. An arrogant tourist bought a giant 1930s wooden toboggan and immediately took it to a steep, icy ski resort. He returned with a broken arm and a shattered sled, throwing an epic public tantrum. He loudly threatened a multi-million-dollar personal injury lawsuit because the primitive flat wooden planks did not come equipped with a steering wheel or an emergency handbrake. He expected a museum piece to drive like a snowmobile. 50. Pest control used to be brutal, but one animal rights activist entirely lost the plot. She discovered a rusted 1880s cast iron mousetrap sitting on a dusty clearance shelf and immediately called the local authorities. She aggressively demanded the shop owner be arrested for promoting extreme rodent violence. She genuinely believed the store should legally be forced to update all of their antique mechanical traps to modern, humane catch and release plastic enclosures before selling them. 51. A perfectly good day of antique hunting turned into an absolute circus over a haunted mirror. A deeply superstitious lady paid $800 for a massive, heavily carved 1880s armoire. She called the shop owner at 3 in the morning, screaming into the phone that the entire piece of furniture was infested with demons. Her actual proof? Her cat hissed at its reflection and hid under the couch. She seriously demanded the store hire an emergency exorcist or take the cursed wood back immediately. Can you imagine trying to reason with someone who thinks a mirror is stealing their pet's soul? 52. The concept of a landline phone completely broke the brain of one very confused millennial. He bought a gorgeous, heavy Bakelite rotary phone from the 1940s just to look cool on his desk. Less than 2 days later, he slammed the heavy plastic down on the counter, visibly shaking with anger. He had spent hours trying to find the hidden charging port for a USB cable and assumed the store sold him a hollow piece of junk. When the owner physically showed him the copper wall wire, the guy completely lost his mind and accused them of selling obsolete, useless trash. 53. History buffs are usually pretty smart, but one specific collector was severely lacking common sense. A guy walked into a high-end antique mall and dropped thousands of dollars on an authentic 19th century brass diving suit helmet. He dragged the 100-pound monster right back through the doors an hour later, demanding his money back. He was absolutely furious that it didn't come with an instruction manual or a built-in oxygen tank. He seriously planned to jump into the local lake with a heavy metal bubble on his head and expected it to magically work like modern scuba gear. 54. Some people simply refuse to believe that life existed before high-speed internet. A highly aggressive corporate manager bought a beautifully preserved 1920s manual typewriter for his trendy home office. He called the antique shop demanding they send a technician out to fix it immediately. His massive complaint? He couldn't figure out how to connect the heavy metal carriage to his wireless printer and was deeply offended that there was no Bluetooth pairing button. Have you ever seen someone so deeply addicted to modern technology that they completely forget how mechanical objects function? 55. And finally, the absolute peak of ridiculous entitlement happened over a piece of used jewelry. A very angry bride-to-be dragged her fiancé into an antique jewelry store clutching a stunning Edwardian platinum engagement ring. She aggressively slammed it on the glass display case, demanding the owner personally apologize to her. Why? Because she did an internet search on the ring's previous owner and found out the woman's marriage had ended in divorce 80 years ago. She genuinely demanded a full refund for bad relationship karma and claimed the antique store was purposely sabotaging modern marriages. It is honestly terrifying that these people walk among us and have the legal right to vote. We have reached a point where grown adults demand software updates for 19th century globes and try to connect wooden furniture to their Wi-Fi. I want to hear the absolute dumbest thing you have ever heard a customer scream in a shop. Post your horror stories below. Smash that like button and subscribe for more chaos.